Jimmy Fallon grinned in front of the camera, letting the atmosphere quiet for a moment before the laughter of the audience roared in the studio. The guest of the evening, a Hollywood actor who had just been involved in a blockbuster, smiled along, despite the doubtful glint in his eyes. In Seoul, thousands of kilometers from New York, seokjin, better known as BTS's Jin, sat glued to the couch of his apartment. His dark eyes were rounded, staring at the glowing television screen amid the darkness of the room. The remote he held shook slightly in his hand. Jin nodded at me. He knew this was no ordinary question. Not Jimmy Fallon. And not right then. The actor turned to Fallon and chuckled before replying, "Oh, you don't know yet? That's a crazy story. Brek." The TV screen suddenly shut off. Jin nodded, his breath quickened. He looked around. It wasn't just his television that went off. His entire apartment was drowning in darkness. Power outages. At the same time, his phone vibrated. An incoming message. "We need to talk. Now. Before it's too late." Jin's heart was pounding. He recognized the number. A number that has not reached him for years. A number that should never appear again. His hands trembled as he typed a reply. "Who is this?" 3 dots on the screen indicate the sender is typing. Jin held his breath. "I know that secret. And someone's looking for you, Jin." Jin stood up quickly, his body stiffened. This is no accident. This is not just a joke. And he knew, tonight, his life had just changed forever. Jin looked at his phone screen with his chest pounding. "I know that secret. And someone's looking for you, Jin." The electricity in his apartment is still out. Outside the window, Seoul's sky was filled with the twinkling lights of skyscrapers. But indoors, darkness swallowed it whole. His mind was raging. This cannot be a coincidence. Someone in New York mentioned her name on Jimmy Fallon's show, and at the same time, someone who should have disappeared long ago suddenly contacted her. Jin took a deep breath and replied to the message. "What do you mean?" The answer came sooner than he expected. "Open your door." Jin is frozen. His gaze was immediately turned to the door of his apartment. The doorknob remained silent, but now he felt that something was watching him from behind the solid wood. This is crazy. He can't just open the door to a stranger who claims to know his secret. But this number is not a foreign number. After a few seconds that felt like a lifetime, Jin walked over. His breath was slightly choked as he peeked out of the door peephole. Empty. "There's no one." The phone vibrated again. "I don't have time. Open it now before they come." Jin was confused. Them? Who was meant by they? But before he could think any further, the sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted him. It's not just one person. There are several. And the sound was getting closer. His instinct screamed. Danger. With a pounding heart, the genie turned the key to the door and opened it slightly. Someone was standing there, wearing a black hoodie with a face partially covered with shadows. Their eyes met. And at that moment, Jin felt as if he had returned to the past, to a secret that should have remained buried. "Come in now," whispered the man, "or you will regret it." Jin only had a few seconds to decide. In the distance, the sound of footsteps was getting closer. Jin didn't have time to think. The sound of footsteps in the hallway is getting closer, faster and faster. "Come in now," whispered the man in front of him, "or you will regret it." Jin looked at him intently. The eyes behind the hoodie's shadow were sharp, full of urgency. But he can't just trust this guy. Behind, the sound of footsteps turned into running. They're getting closer. 1 second, 2 seconds. Jin tightened his jaw, then pulled the man in and closed the door quickly. Just as the sound of footsteps stopped right in front of his apartment. Silence. The genie and the man exchanged bated breath in the darkness. Then, knock. 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 Someone knocked on the door. Jin felt his blood rustle. He turned to the man who had just entered his apartment. The person signals with a finger on his lips. "Do not make a sound." The knock gets louder. Then a man's voice came from outside. "We know you're in there, seokjin." Jin held his breath. The person next to him stiffened even more. His eyes looked at the genie cautiously, as if to say, "We must go. Now." But Jin couldn't move yet. He is still trying to understand all this. Who are those people outside? Are they just fanatics who know the address? Or something much worse? The knock turns into a blow. Brek. Bruck. Brek. The apartment door shook. Jin knew this door wouldn't last long. The person next to him pulled something out of his hoodie pocket, a small silver key. With a quick movement, he walked towards the bookcase in the corner of the room and shifted a thick book. Jin was stunned when he saw him insert the key into the small hole hidden behind the shelf. Click. A secret panel opens, revealing a narrow passage behind it. Jin looked at the person, surprised. What is this dash? Don't ask too many questions, the man whispered sharply. If you want to stay alive, come with me now. Brek. The apartment door almost broke. Jin had only one choice. With a single breath, he stepped into the secret passage, leaving behind the apartment and all the security he had ever known. As the door behind him closed, the sound of shattered wood echoed in his apartment. There late. Jin disappeared into the darkness. The narrow hallway was dark and dusty. The air inside felt damp, like a place that had not been used for a long time. Jin walked quickly, following the person who had just pulled him in here. His breath still choked from the adrenaline that had not subsided. Behind them, the sound of his apartment door being slammed repeatedly until the wood cracked. Then came the sound of footsteps entering the room. The men had already entered. Jin grinned his teeth. Who are they? What do they want from him? Hurry up, whispered the person in front of him. Jin quickened his pace. This hallway was too narrow, only enough for one person to walk at a time. The walls were cold. The smell of earth and old wood burst into his nose. They turned twice before finally arriving at a small steel door. The man took out the key again, turned it deftly, and the door opened into a small room that looked like a hiding place. As soon as they entered, the door closed tightly. Quiet. Jin took a moment to take a deep breath before staring at the person in front of him. Now explain, he said sharply. Who are you? Why am I being chased? The man opened his hoodie, revealing his face. Jin nodded. It was a face he hadn't seen in a long time. The face of someone who should have been dead. My name is Han Jisoo, the man said quietly. And I came back to avenge what they did to us. Jin looked at him with widened eyes. This is impossible. Han Jisoo is someone he once knew years ago, someone who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Everyone thought he was dead. Jin nodded his head. What do you mean? What does all this have to do with me? Jisoo narrowed her eyes. Because, seokjin, you're the only witness left. Jin felt his hair stand on end. Witness for what? Jisoo approached, looking at him fixedly. Witness to a murder they've been covering up. The murder that made your name on Jimmy Fallon's show last night. Jin's world seems to have stopped spinning. Murder? What does Jisoo mean? And who are they he's talking about? Before Jin could say anything, Jisoo's phone vibrated. He stared at the screen for a while before looking up, his expression turning serious. They already know you're here. Jin's heart was pounding. Who are they really? Jisoo grinned her jaw. People who will not stop until you die. Without warning, a loud voice sounded above them. Bang. Bang. Jin looked up at the ceiling of the room. There's someone above them, and they have just been discovered. Bang. Bang. A loud thumping sound above them echoed, signaling one thing. They had already been found. Jisoo cursed slowly and pulled Jin to the corner of the room. With a quick movement, he pulled the wooden planks on the floor, revealing a small staircase that led underground. Get in now, Jisoo whispered sharply. Jin hesitated for a moment. His mind was still spinning with unanswered questions, but the sound of something being hit from above left him no other choice. He descended the stairs quickly, followed by Jisoo, who covered the wooden board above them. Darkness instantly enveloped them. Jin could hear his own breathing, fast and heavy. The footsteps above them sounded closer and closer. Jisoo grabbed Jin's hand, leading him to walk through the cold, narrow hallway. Are you going to explain something to me? Jin whispered angrily. What really happened? Jisoo didn't answer until they reached the end of the hall. He pressed his hand against the wall, looking for something, then with a subtle click, the wall opened, revealing a small space with the dim light of an old chandelier. Inside, there was a board full of photos, old news pieces, and notes that looked like a map of connections between various people. Jin approached. His eyes widened when he saw something in the middle of the board. Picture of him. Next to him, there was a photograph of another man, a familiar-looking man. His face looked blurry in Jin's memory, but something inside him screamed that he knew this person. Who is he? Jin asked, his voice trembling. Jisoo looked at him intently. You really don't remember, do you? Jin frowned. What should I remember? Jisoo takes one of the pieces of news and gives it to Jin. Jin's fingers trembled as he read the title. Famous K-pop stars involved in mysterious incident, one person missing. Jin felt his breathing stop. He read further, his eyes sweeping away every word with growing fear. a man was reported missing after an incident at a private party attended by several well-known celebrities, including Kim Seokjin. Private party? Lost? A voice whispered in his head, like a shadow from a buried past. Dim lights, the sound of clinking glasses, faint laughter, then screams. Jin felt his chest tighten. He was there. He saw something. But why can't he remember? Jisoo watched Jin's expression coldly. I don't know how they made you forget this, but you were the last witness, and they won't let you live much longer. Jin looked at Jisoo with his eyes wide. At the same time, a loud explosion sounded from above them. Boom. They don't have any more time. We have to go. Jisoo pulled Jin, but Jin's body was still stiff with the facts he had just discovered. Before he could move, the sound of footsteps approached quickly. They're not alone anymore. An explosion from above shook the basement. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the sounds of footsteps were heard closer and closer. Jisoo wasted no time. He pulled the genie out of the room, through a narrow passage that was getting dark. But Jin couldn't stop thinking about what he had just read. A party. Someone's missing, and his name was on the news. Jin felt something gripping his chest, an inexplicable fear. He tries to remember, but all that emerges are fragmented pieces of the image, the flash of camera light, the sound of glasses clashing, the music echoing, and then scream. He gasped. Jin, focus. Jisoo pulled him back to reality. We have to go now. But Jin could no longer hold back the questions that were spinning in his head. Jisoo, who was missing that night? Jisoo was silent for a moment, then looked at him deeply. You really don't remember, do you? Jin shook his head, frustrated. I tried, but I only see a faint shadow. Jisoo gritted her teeth, then grabbed her phone. He looked for something before showing the screen to Jin. Jin stared at the photo on the screen, the face of a young man, smiling brightly at the camera. There was something familiar about him, but Jin couldn't remember it right away. Who is he? Jin whispered. Jisoo took a deep breath. His name is Kang Mi-ho. When the name was mentioned, something inside Jin's head exploded. The picture just appeared. Mi-ho laughed, raising his glass. Jin was next to him, smiling faintly. Music blaring in the background. Then things changed. Mi-ho staggered. Someone shouted. There was panic. And blood. Blood on the white marble floor. Jin jerked back, his face deathly pale. I saw it. His voice trembled. Mi-ho, something happened to him that night. Jisoo looked at him intently. Not at all, Jin. He was killed. And you were there. Jin's world is spinning. He wants to deny it. He wants to say it's impossible. But the memories that have just come back are too real. Kang Mi-ho was killed that night, and Jin was there, looking at everything. But who did it? Before Jin could answer the question, the sound of footsteps grew closer. They found us, Jisoo said sharply. We have to go, right now. Jin couldn't move, because one last piece of memory hit him like lightning. Before Mi-ho fell, he stared at someone. And that person was, Jisoo pulled Jin to an old door that was almost hidden in a narrow hallway. Behind them, the sound of footsteps was approaching. Jin was still gasping, his mind full of memories that had just surfaced. Kang Mi-ho was killed that night. And it was there. Jisoo pushed the wooden door, but didn't move. He cursed softly, trying to kick her. Jin helped, his shoulder hit hard, until finally the door opened and the two of them staggered into a wider basement. Click. A voice came from above their heads. Jisoo raised her hand, gesturing for Jin to remain silent. They both froze. Out of the shadows, someone stepped out. Jin held his breath. He didn't recognize the man, but something about him felt dangerous. Kim Seokjin. The man's voice was heavy, deep, and almost emotionless. Finally, we meet. Jisoo moved quickly, pulling a gun from under her jacket. But before he could do anything, the man just smiled a little, and in an instant, something shot up from behind him. Bang! Jisoo groaned. Her shoulders jerked backwards. Jin shouted in surprise. Jisoo. But Jisoo was still standing, even though blood began to flow from her arm. He looked at the man sharply, his jaw hardened. I didn't expect them to send you, Jisoo hissed. So this is how far will they go to protect his name? The man looked at them expressionlessly. You should know, Jisoo. There are names that should not be mentioned. Jin nodded. A name that can't be called. Who are they protecting? Is Mi-ho's killer. Is someone more powerful. Jin felt his body shiver. Suddenly, the man moved, faster than Jin expected. Within seconds, he was already in front of them, and before the genie had time to react, the man's hand gripped his nape firmly. "Now," the man whispered, almost friendly. "Why don't we talk about what you remember?" Jin bit his lip. He could feel cold sweat running down his temples, because he knows, if he says the wrong name, he probably won't get out of here alive. The tension in Jin's chest grew stronger. His eyes met the eyes of the mysterious man, cold, illegible, and full of implied threat. Jin could feel his heartbeat racing in his chest. In the corner of the room, Jisoo was still trying to hold back the blood flowing from the gunshot wound to her arm. "So, seokjin," the man's voice was calm, almost soft. "What do you remember?" Jin nodded his head that he wants to lie. Says that he still does not remember anything. But he knew it wouldn't work. This man won't just believe it. And even worse now, he really remembers something. The night of the party. Camera flash. The sound of glasses clashing. Dan Miho. Miho is talking to someone. Someone influential. The genie couldn't see his face clearly in those memories, but she remembered the tone of the man's voice. Smooth, relaxed, but menacing. Then everything happened so quickly. Miho is down. Blood flowed on the white marble floor. And the genie just stood there, frozen. Kim Seokjin. The voice of the man before him pulled him back to reality. Jin held his breath if he said that name now. Would he die? The man seems to be able to read her mind. He smiled a little, slanting, like someone who was enjoying this game. "I know you remember," he said quietly. "The question is, are you smart enough to keep quiet?" Jin felt his body shake. On the one hand, he knows that this truth is dangerous. But on the other hand, if he stays silent, Miho will never get justice. Jisoo suddenly spoke up, although her voice sounded weak. "Seokjin, don't." Jin clenched his hands that if he didn't say anything, they might still be alive. But if he speaks, reveal the name that had been hidden. Is he ready to face the consequences? His lips opened. "I remember someone." The man's eyes narrowed. The room felt increasingly suffocating. Jin took a deep breath, then said a name that will change everything. And in an instant, the man's gun was raised, aimed directly at Jin's head. The man's voice sounded colder than before. Jin held his breath, his heart pounding so hard that it felt like it was about to explode in his chest. The black eyes of the man in front of him were now filled with something dangerous, not just a threat, but a decision. He already said that name. A name that cannot be called. "I don't need to say it twice." Jin tried to keep his voice steady. "You've heard it." Click. The man pulled the trigger. Jisoo moves as fast as lightning. With the rest of his energy, he nudged Jin's body to the side. A shot exploded in the air, bang, and the bullet shot just inches from the genie's head, hitting the wall behind them. Jisoo fell to the floor, groaning. Blood began to flow more profusely from the wound. Jin rushed to grab her, panicking. "Jisoo, hang in there." But before he could do any further, the man was already walking closer with calm steps. "You think I won't do it?" he said, pointing his gun again. "You think you can say that name and stay alive?" Jin looked at him, his jaw hardened. "If you wanted to kill me," he said quietly, "why didn't you do it in the first place?" The man was silent for a moment. Jin could see something behind his eyes. Doubt? "No, calculations. Because I'm just an extension of the hand," the man finally said. "I will not kill you before the order comes directly from him." Jin felt his body tighten. "So he knows I remember him." A small smile was etched on the man's face. "Now yes." Brrrtkt. The sound of an explosion suddenly echoed throughout the room. The wall behind them collapsed, and smoke filled the air. Jin coughed. His eyes narrowed to see what happened. From behind the rubble, several black-clothed figures entered with guns raised. "The troops are coming." Jisoo pulls Jin out with the rest of her energy. "We have to get out." But before they could move, the man raised his hand, gesturing to his troops. "Catch them alive." Jin felt his body freeze. That he is no longer just a witness. He has become the main target. And if he gets caught now, he will never see the outside world again. "Catch them alive." The order was still hanging in the air when the room shook again. Smoke and dust were flying, making it difficult for Jin to see clearly. But he knew one thing. If he was caught, it would all be over. Jisoo pulled him away with the rest of her strength. "Jin, it's now or never." They ran. Their steps staggered, hampered by the debris and Jisoo's wounds that continued to bleed. But the army was faster. Bang, bang, bang. Rapid fire exploded around them. Jin could feel the bullets streaking just inches from his body that he knew they would not die here, not because their enemies doubted, but because they were still needed alive. Jin forced his legs to move faster. He has to get out of this place. It should be Brack. Someone kicked him from the side. Jin fell hard to the floor. His chest hit the concrete. The air seemed to come out of his lungs. He coughed, trying to get up, but a shoe stepped on his back, holding him on the ground. That's enough. Jin looked up, his eyes widened. The man stood above him, looking at him like a king who had just caught a traitor. Jisoo tried to move, but the other troops had already put a gun to her head. There's no way out. You know, seokjin. The man squatted down, looking at her fixedly. People like you usually make two choices. Jin is pissed. What do you mean? 1. You shut up. Your life goes on, but in the shadows. You'll disappear from the world, but at least stay alive. The man grinned. 2. You open your mouth. You uncover everything you know, and I'll make sure you die in a way that people out there can't even imagine. Jin felt his blood rustle. So, seokjin. The man stood up, gesturing to his troops. What's your choice? Jin looked around. Jisoo looked at him with a desperate expression, as if she knew that there was no right answer here. But then, something flashed in his mind, a third option, something that the man did not take into account. Jin took a deep breath. I choose. Brack. Jin hit his own head on the floor hard. Blood immediately flowed from his temples. His gaze turned, but he forced his body to keep moving. Quickly, he rolled his body backwards, kicking the man's legs with the rest of his strength. The man fell backwards, losing his balance. Jisoo immediately took a chance. He grabbed a pistol from one of the guards and fired a bullet towards the main light. The building went completely dark. Screams and footsteps could be heard from all directions. Jin felt Jisoo's hand pull him, forcing him to run. The two of them scattered into the darkness, their breath hunting. Emergency exit in front. A faint light sneaked in from outside. Just a little more, a little more, Brack. The doors opened. The night air hit their faces. Jin and Jisoo ran out without looking back. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the genie felt freedom.